Good evening. This is John Bushka, and there's a picture of Yankee Stadium in 2022 when I went to a game. I think it was the Blue Jays. Another picture of the sky in Yankee Stadium, very interesting. And one more picture, very interesting. And so let me just bring up uh, my own picture, and I'm going to talk about the selling of my books again. Um, these and show you. Remember this? This is the first one. Actually, there was an earlier printing in 1997. It was with a printer, a local printer. It had about 400 copies. And then the second book in 2002, and the third book in 2014. And let's go back to this. Um, I will refer to that time I was in New York City. I had just gotten into a hotel room in New York City in August of 2022. I was going to head for the Yankee Stadium probably an hour later, and had a ticket already paid for and everything. And I walked into the room, put down my bags, and put the computer on one of the desk or that was in the room, and hadn't even opened up the cover, and my cell phone rang. Um, and it was my publisher, Universe, and they wanted to talk about my buying more services. And this was a minute after I checked into a hotel room. It was totally coincidental. They didn't know I was in New York, why I was there or anything. And to backtrack just a little bit, back in April of 2022, on April 30th, I had attended a pitch fest in in a downtown hotel on 45th Street near Times Square, a very large downtown. I think it was the Omni. I think it was the Omni, as I remember. And it had gone pretty well, and I was thinking that that had gone back to 2019 when they had called about the pitch fest, which would have been in California, and that I wound up not being able to go to that because of COVID breaking out and the fear of being quarantined and everything. But they called again at the end of 2021, and I did get to go to one in 2022. And then a few months later, when I'm in New York, I get this call. And the interesting thing is, in the next, that's about almost 2 years ago. And in that amount of time, I probably spent about $100,000 on trying to sell my books. And the oldest of them dates back to 1997 and went POD in 2000. And the others are 2002 and 2014. It's very unusual for somebody to spend money trying to sell old books. It was mostly to bookstore, bookstore promotions and to book fairs where the books are on display, and sometimes you can go and hand books out and sign them and so forth. I've done that. And there were also professional videos made of film proposals, and then finally a screenplay written, a treatment and a screenplay written by a professional screenwriter. So I spent probably close to 100,000 on a lot of these different things in about 2 years, that I had spent almost nothing since, well, I had spent 3,000 or so publishing the third book in 2014, and spent almost nothing since 2002. And that's very unusual with older books. And there is sort of a reason why I did it, which is what I wanted to talk a little bit about. I after after particularly 9/11, after let's go back to 1997 when I purchased when I had my own print run of this first book, which is actually smaller print than the new one. It's probably not as well bound. It's actually a collector's item sometimes. It's been sold as a collector's item once in a while. And when I was in Minneapolis, I um, was able to sell most of those copies. I did get lots of interest from booksellers and individuals and so forth. And I actually managed to sell that original printing myself in about 2.5 years for the most part. And in 2000s, when I went to print on demand with iUniverse, we really didn't do much more to try to sell it. In 2002, I wrote the second book after about I wrote at the end of the year as a response to 9/11 and the idea how that affected individual liberties and took various interesting takes on it. Also talked about a Bill of Rights 2 idea, which got talked about a little bit then. And then I had been laid off, and at the end of 2003, toward the end of 2003, I came back to Mother, stayed with her until she died. I had interim jobs. I substitute taught. That was interesting, but that ran into some difficulties, and some of it was about my online work, and that's another story. And various other jobs, election officer for one thing. And I didn't do as much with that as I probably should have. My mother passed away at the end of 2010, and I did inherit an estate. I don't even mind showing you. I'm not going to spend much time, but I don't mind showing you that I keep track of what's my money and what's the estate's money that isn't mine. And I have my own trust, and there's still my mother's trust, and there are some things I'm allowed to do, and some things I'm allowed to pay myself. And conceivably, I could get in trouble if I broke the law, just like Trump did. Yeah, it's the same sort of thing. So that's been going on. But I wrote the third book in 2014 to sort of bring everything up to date and really explain in more detail my own idea of individual rights and individual morality, independent of claiming that you belong to a marginalized group, particularly. That never gets mentioned. And it also makes no mention of trans. It talks about don't ask, don't tell, and a little bit about gay marriage. Obergefell had not happened yet, and talks about the end of sodomy laws, and it also talks about free speech and the Child Online Protection Act, that kind of thing. It does not talk about gender identity or marginalized groups or critical race theory or some of the more recent things. And it was written especially before Trump and before all the issues with the election and all the issues you've been hearing about recently had come up. And I don't really have time to write another book on the scale that I did. Also, today is my birthday. It's my 81st birthday. I meant to say that as this opened. Um, so um, I have had a concern that over time, what I did over the years is I just put a lot of the material online. Maintained a large number of blogs, talked about a lot of things. The whole subject of gays in the military and people being in intimate and confined spaces. What that tends to do is generate a lot of issues, but it doesn't and it tends to generate a lot of controversy. And so it'll generate a lot of clickbait, even with search engines, even without using algorithms, which is what I was doing for 25 years with putting a lot of stuff online. Had 20 blogs at one point, and then I decided that I would have to take them all down at the beginning of 2022 and be very careful how I use the do as do tell name and even my own nickname. I won't get into all the reasons, but basically I didn't think I was commercially viable anymore. And I could get in trouble if I wasn't commercially viable. There was some talk about this at the end of 2019 and with YouTube and so forth, some controversy. Then we had the pandemic and everything. But so what I decided was, I could speak for myself and give away content free and use my own money, that even though I had inherited some of it ethically, but I couldn't ask for it. I couldn't have a Patreon channel or ask for money if I had inheritance. So I had to do it this way. Now, the advantage is I didn't have to pester people. I didn't call you or ask you to be on my email list or I didn't try to run a book club or didn't try to run a course or didn't try to run anything where people had to pay me for something. And I have thought about Substack. I don't know if I could get people to pay or not now, but I have thought about that. But that's more recent. Basically, I've just let people find it, and I've got my views got kind of circulated because of search engines. And I knew that I wouldn't be allowed to do that forever. So that's when I cut the blogs way back down in 2022. But I wasn't, I'm not very willing to let somebody else speak for me, and I'm not willing to be a huckster for somebody else's stuff, their services or whatever they're selling or mortgages or insurance or anything. And I'm not willing to be a huckster for taking sides in the culture wars either. I'm not willing to be, to claim I'm a member of a group, and I'm not willing to say that I deserve to be in patriarchal power or something because I haven't proved I can reproduce a family. So I had to do it this way. I hope you get what I'm saying. The Also, usually when people write books and they become bestsellers, usually they've become a so-called expert in some field that's recognized, especially academics. And some of these will be bestsellers. They might be politicians or they might be renowned in something and have developed a reputation. I've never done that. I mean, mainframe information technology wasn't something that you could develop a worldwide reputation in, and that was how I earned my living for 30 years. You got to be known locally among your own friends, just like the way things were before the internet, and that was actually a very interesting life. That'd be another discussion. But it wasn't the kind of thing that would make, a 6 million, a Mr. Beast YouTube channel or something. It wasn't that kind of thing. Or it wasn't the kind of thing where you could really sell expertise online and make a real business very easily, because it's become kind of outmoded. So I kind of come from an older generation and kind of maybe time got past me, sort of living in the fourth dimension. But the possibility of a movie, because my story, my own life story, with the William and Mary expulsion and the time I had in the military anyway, where I wound up in special training company. After I had, as an assistant instructor, before I went into the military, actually graded students and probably had an effect on who got drafted. And since I had a lot of power when I was 22 or 24 or something, before I was ever drafted myself. A very strange story. And that does you can make an interesting screenplay out of that, which I'm working on in various ways. And one of the services I paid for was a professional screenplay, but I'm also working in a screenwriting group, and that seemed the interaction with the group seems to be going pretty well. People seem to be understanding what I'm getting at, so that's what um, that that's kind of what's been happening. I want to keep my own identity. I don't want to cave in and just be somebody's protester carrying another, you know, you know, another sign in a crowd. Although it's very humbling, just to admit that you have to do that, that you're not better than other people that have to do that. That's the other side of this kind of coin. Um, I guess I've pretty much covered the history of this. In fact, back in 2012, about a year after my mother passed away, I did get a call from the publisher about spending more money. This was on the first two books. The third one hadn't been written. At the time, I thought the books were too old to try to sell that way. And so I didn't do that. I decided to write a third book. And I didn't really try to sell that real aggressively. But it might have been a good time to do that because Don't Ask, Don't Tell had been repealed, remember, in September of 2011. And in fact, the legislation to authorize a repeal had passed in December of 2010, about the same time my mother was passing away. In fact, my involvement with that was the last thing she knew before she passed away. It was just sort of part of the story, actually. So that's kind of where I am now. The justification for my staying active. I have one blog, one fixed site, and the YouTube channel, and just run through. That's the fixed site, and that's the blog. Talk about movie reviews and book reviews. A lot of stuff on the blog, and there's my um, there's my playlist. And you'll see there's a professional video site. That's where that's some of the
discussion that's outside the scope of this discussion. But
I couldn't stop it.
I do have a new commercial site, and I might take credit cards or something if there's some reason to later on. But that's
trying to get started playing the video, and I didn't really. And here's one. Here's another one that where I have sort of pitch decks for an outline of how I would make a movie myself. So that's what's going on. The There is quite a bit of evidence, in my opinion, that there's some interest. I don't know that Hollywood is what it was before. We all know it's changed a lot with the strike and with the internet affecting it so much, and the concerns about artificial intelligence, and just the fact that people want to work a lot more independently than they used to in Hollywood, and that's affected the culture. But yeah, I think it has a real chance of going somewhere the one way or another. You may see a film about this, about the subject matter of the books. It's an unusual story, and I can't claim to be an expert in something that'll get 5 million members, subscribers, if I just put it on YouTube. But it is an interesting story with a lot of very strange twists and ironies and moral questions, particularly about my own military service and winding up with a master's degree in math, but winding up in special training anyway for a few weeks about the time that MLK was assassinated early in 1968. Then winding in the Pentagon for a few months. That's kind of, and then winding up at Fort Eustis. That's kind of an interesting story too. So that's what I wanted to talk about today and wanted to bring you up to date on. And I do thank you for listening.